All right, so welcome in today. I think we are going to talk about the future of education, not just universities. And I think we have a thought-provoking person here in the room on my left, Sriven Naidu, and he's going to talk about why people still want to go to university. And when they get there, probably what they expect, what's right, what's wrong with the current business model, probably with the people behind universities, because I've been following a few guys that talk about this, namely Elon Musk. And Elon Musk is not taking his kids to school. He created his own school. And if a guy like Elon Musk, one of the leaders we have in the world, doesn't believe in the system, should we believe in the system? I will stop right here, or else becomes my presentation and not yours. So thank you very much for being here, and over to you. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Hugo. I'm hoping everybody can hear me. If you can give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Perfect.
Perfect.
Okay, and so I'm going to share my screen now. And first of all, let me just say thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining me today, for making time. As I mentioned in the LinkedIn post, I really hope for some interaction and no questions are taboo, as Hugo himself mentioned. Let's have a good, thought-provoking discussion today. And let me just begin by saying, while preparing for the discussion, I was scrolling through Hugo's post on LinkedIn, and I found out quite sad news that Sean Connery has passed away. So quite sad. He was my favorite James Bond actor. I always admired how well he aged. He was the epitome of the smart, witty, handsome, wickedly clever English civil service agent, except that he was Scottish, actually. So he aged really well, and few people age really well like him. One category is yoga teachers, and you can understand why they look so well as they age. They don't need any Botox. The other category is today's topic, universities. And universities age really well, but there I think there's some Botox. So I will explain to you what I mean by some Botox with old universities in a moment, right? So today's audience, we have some administrators from universities, some academics, some edtech entrepreneurs, I think some investors. And I want to make clear that I'm talking about both definitions of higher education, both the programs that you could be doing for young people or for working adults, and also higher education as institutions, the universities that not only do education, they do research, they provide status, they provide membership in a tribe, and maybe even a network where you grow old together, you make friends, you do favors for each other, etc. Why do I make this distinction? To many academics in universities, education is only the tip of the iceberg. They're more excited about publishing in peer-reviewed journals, being cited by their counterparts, and that's more important. So for many decades, some universities neglect education and it hasn't hurt them, right? But I think EdTech and COVID-19 recently is going to change that drastically, right? Universities are going to have to pay attention to the education part of what they offer. So who is this talk for? A, for instructors working on education in universities. You're the part of the university that gets most affected by all these edtech startups, the other guys on this call, right? It's also for university stewards, policymaker, governing boards, politicians. The people in charge of universities tend also to be in charge of innovation, right? And I think if you begin to see that unless university education is relevant, students will stop attending universities, you'll stop having alumni who make donations, and then budgets dry up. And pretty soon, the only research you can do is research that is immediately practical for society. And I know that researchers don't only like to do that kind of research, right? For edtech entrepreneurs and investors, I'm going to share some cutting edge initiatives around the world that I've been following, meeting people, putting together best practices. And it's not only about technology and pedagogy, but essentially what's the value for people? It's not just a piece of paper, it's not a certification, maybe not even a job, right? And maybe for EdTech, investors, you want to partner some of these institutions, or maybe you want to do what they're doing on your own. So the main thing is what got us here won't get us there, right? What was successful for higher education in the past is not going to be enough for the future, right? There are many reasons for this. One is just transferring knowledge and skills is commoditized. Even discussions about philosophical topics or about politics can now be done on an app called Ceasefire. Ceasefire used to be called Change a View or Change My View. It was a Reddit forum started by, I think, an Irish young person who said, I told my mom that the best present I can get for Christmas is money. My mom disagreed. Could you tell me why I'm wrong? And when people started changing this young person's mind, uh, he was so grateful, he sort of gave credit, a virtual credit called a delta. And pretty soon this was a phenomenon and people were trying to persuade each other, change their views with sound, logical arguments, none of the vitriolic you find online. And people were getting status as influencers and people who would change your mind, right? So even this, you can crowdsource philosophy, you can crowdsource critical thinking, and you don't have to pay a university for it, right? And just that same way, learners have many affordable options, high quality options, cheap options for getting job relevant certificates. And UTEL is one of them in Mexico that helps adult learners get courses that are certified by Google and other employers, right? Very affordable, very well supported. And so knowledge and skills is a commodity now. So what are people going to pay for? We have now online program management. There's a listed company called 2U, there's Scalahead, and competition is frictionless, right? A student in Indonesia could learn an MIT degree sitting at home, right? And in future, MIT might mean Maharashtra Institute of Technology or the Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand mobility agreement. So it's not just from the rest of the world to America, it could be from America to the rest of the world too. Industry 4.0, according to World Economic Forum, says we need skills like collaboration, creativity, empathy, and ability to adapt to uncertainty and ambiguity, right? We hear this VUCA thing all the time. But universities do the opposite. They do high-stake exams, purely intellectual challenges to be completed in a fixed time. You do it individually, not in a team. And there's a right answer, which is more like a puzzle, not like a real life problem, right? So are universities ready for the challenge? So even before COVID-19, the future was uncertain, right? We know that jobs are going away, people are doing gigs. So even if you can promise a learner that they will be employable, that might not be enough to make them invest in your programs anymore. So what must you promise that people give up their time and their money to do a program with you, right? So what might individuals pay for? What might governments pay for? And there's sometimes a question about whether private education should give different outcomes than publicly funded education that taxpayers pay for, right? So I'm going to spend a bit of time on some frameworks, but this helps you sort of understand why there's an overlap between the two sectors. So bear with me for a bit. I'm going to introduce this concept of a merit good. This is very popular in Europe, but I find that very few American economists talk about merit goods, right? A merit good is an economic good, something like a public good that is underconsumed, right? An example is health. It is not valued enough by individuals, so they don't buy it in a market. It's not valued enough by society, so governments can't use taxpayers' money for it, right? So you need some sort of market intervention, and health and education is an example of a merit good, right? So public health, you know, if we were living in countries where everybody had healthy lifestyle, beg your pardon, somebody needs to come here. Thank you. Okay, so if you were in a society where everybody had healthy lifestyles and strong immune system, then COVID-19 would be less of an issue. So health is a merit good in that sense. It's good for you, but it's also good for society. And people underestimate it, right? It's like clean drinking water and clean air. So because free markets don't subsidize this, don't produce this in enough quantities, we have to do some funny things with government subsidies, etc., right? And you will actually find that not all education is a merit good, right? Having more PhD students when actually you don't have enough plumbers or accountants or lawyers is not good for society. So, but not everybody in academia understands that we don't need many more PhDs, right? But having a bachelor's degree when there's only a few people with a bachelor's degree made sense. In our father's time and our grandfather's time, it was good investment. But today, 50% of any birth cohort in an OECD country gets a degree eventually. So the ROI, the return on investment, is not so high. Okay, so interesting thing, programs that really deliver value, right, based on what society needs at that point of time, get supported by both the market and the government. And you notice some governments even give you a tax rebate or match a donation if it's going to health or education, right? I'll tell you this interesting story about Stanley Ho, who owns the casinos in Macau. He pledged 500 million Hong Kong if his alumni from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology would donate money, right? So every dollar they give, he would give $1. And I suspect that after that, they would take the $2 and go to the government, who would then give them another $2, right? Because the nature of merit goods is such that governments want to support it, but they don't know which merit goods to support. So they need some philanthropists to signal what society values, right? So if you play in the space of merit goods, there's going to be lots of money. There's going to be money from the private sector, from the public sector, and philanthropists, right? So I hope that was useful. I'm going to now go into what might be considered the higher ed merit goods of the future, right? And I'm going to ask you to wait and watch this space, because I'm just going to take a bit of time to go into a side topic, right? Which of these three ways do you think of higher education, right? The first one is it's an economic market. We're trying to get the best students, the best professors for the cheapest prices so that countries can be more competitive. That's one way of looking at it. Another way is that it's a competitive status hierarchy. We're looking for rankings and top universities, and we're looking to be associated with a high prestige university so that we can put this nice sticker on our car that says you're a grad of some prestigious university. And the third one is it's a collaborative international networks, right? So scientists working on climate change, working on sustainability, exchanging information freely because it's a global public good, right? So can you take a poll, 1, 2, and 3? You can just type which do you think best represents higher education? Is it a market? Is it about status? Or is it about sharing knowledge freely to make the world a better place? Thanks. I see lots of twos. Yeah. Either all of you are academics or okay, I'm beginning to see some number threes. It should be 3, but it is 1. Yes. I see my friend Arnaud Renoir from Paris is saying it depends on what you're considering. Yes, it does depend, because actually none of them is totally correct. Each of them is partly true. But of course, within universities, number 2 is the predominant one. That's how academics in universities see themselves, right? So very good. Let's move on. Okay, obstacles to innovation in higher education institutions. This is important because if we knew why universities weren't innovating, we could choose the programs that actually are innovative and doing the right things, because the market is full of misleading signals, right? Like the rankings and accreditations and something. There are misleading signals. If we knew what's stopping innovation, we could also help the people in charge of universities support the people who are working on innovative education programs, right? And help them compete with the edtechs. And I also want to help the edtechs compete with the universities, because if there's competition, we all win, right? So edtechs may be thinking they are offering skills, knowledge, and certification, but there may be new spaces like affiliation and community membership, which is actually possibly what people are paying for more and more. And there is one more thing that I haven't mentioned yet, but we'll come to that. Okay, so what are the obstacles to innovation? If you look at the top 20 ranked universities in the world, it has hardly changed in decades, right? This is a very sticky ranking. 40% of the score comes from a reputation rankings, which is like saying we decide whether you have a good reputation by asking people if you have a good reputation, which is circuitous, right? And what they do is they ask you to be like Harvard and MIT, and anybody who wants to be like a brand new thing is penalized for not looking like Harvard and MIT, because the criteria creates incentives to be like the old guys, right? So let me explain to you with a metaphor, right? Imagine you are you have to take a health test for your employer and you have to see 10 specialists. By saying 40% of the criteria is reputation rankings, it's like saying 4 out of your medical tests, you don't have to do it again next year. You can use the best tests from last year. We will assume you are as good as you were last year, right? And that same 4 tests you can carry over into the next year as well. So every year you get the benefit of your 4 best tests in the first year, right? And so there's a really long lag effect before any deterioration in quality shows up, right? What this means is the leaders of the top-ranked universities don't have any urgency to change, right? Because they can ride on their past glory for a long, long time. The other thing that prevents universities from innovating is that if you have loyal, influential, and wealthy alumni, it's an off-balance sheet asset, right? It doesn't show on your financial statements, but actually when you need money, it can appear miraculously. What would you say if I told you that a few years ago, Oxford University was 4 weeks away from bankruptcy, and the Vice Chancellor, John Hood, a Kiwi from New Zealand, was brought in to raise funds quietly, discreetly, and he raised at least 770 million. I don't know if he met his target of 1.25 billion pounds, which he managed to raise in quite a short amount of time, because alumni will not let their alma mater sink, right? So if you have this feeling that you are invincible, you might not really feel the urgency to innovate, right? But I think this is an illusion, right? And while you may have a long time, you don't have forever. The other thing that stops innovation is that because the top guys are not changing, the new guys are too busy following the top guys, because like you said earlier, it's a prestige thing, right? Everybody's trying to look like MIT and Harvard. So if MIT and Harvard aren't changing, the new guys are not changing. It's the few special guys who are going out on a limb, really bold, who are doing new stuff, and they may get penalized for it in the rankings, but they need to have the staying power to stick with it until the rankings change, right? So that's the game that's going on right now. Okay, so one in the background, a friend of mine, Von Tan, wrote a book after looking at all the high-end kitchens in the world. You could think of Noma, El Bulli, Modernist Cuisine, and he found out how innovation is done. And this is a great book for anybody who's new to innovation, because it uses food as a metaphor and everybody can relate to food, right? And one of the problems he talks about is it becomes comfortable to exploit what you're good at rather than to explore something you may not be good at. This is something difficult for human beings to do, right? And so the top universities are happy to stay where they are, they won't change. Okay, so let me see if, okay, so we were talking about what are some of the merit goods that universities can provide, right? And I think it's not skills, it's not minds, it's not knowledge, it is mindsets. Long after you graduate from the university, do you take away something that has transformed you and the way you see the world and the way you think? So there's this thing called growth mindset, you might have heard. Instead of thinking some people are smart and some people are not, some people are good at math, some people are not. If you believe that I can get good at anything, if I just try, that's a growth mindset. There is a more complicated, sophisticated concept of growth mindset called learning agility. A Korn Ferry researcher has developed a psychometric tool called Talent X7, which measures on 7 dimensions whether you are likely to adapt to a new situation, a new challenge. In those 7 dimensions, self-awareness and responsiveness to feedback are the things that prevent executives from becoming really successful. So I say that again. Self-awareness and responsiveness to feedback is what trips up high potentials from adapting to a new challenge, right? So can we give our learners learning agility? And I'll talk about this a bit more in the next slide. There's also something called global mindset. Do you see the world as just your little village and your little country, or do you sort of get a sense of how big the world is, how many different cultures there are, that climate change is real, that we have to worry about sustainability, right? Um, this kind of mindset is something we need to give our students, right? And the third one is the uncertainty mindset, which is being out of your comfort zone, being pushed into your comfort out of your comfort zone by your educational program, and ideally even being coached on how to manage and come out of that discomfort, right? So I'm going to now lay out some programs that do this very well, and I'll explain to you with the examples why I think they do this very, very well, right? So on the left, we have Minerva Project. You may know of it, Minerva Project. It's a fully online liberal arts program. Why they're good at learning agility is on the online programs, the professor can drop into breakout rooms, listen to the discussion, and immediately give you feedback if you made a good comment, etc. You don't have to wait till the end of the course to get a grade. Every tutorial, every group discussion you get, somebody can be overhearing the discussion and giving you feedback that that was a great point, that was a great discussion, etc. So that's very good for learning, right? Minerva Project also moves every couple of months. The students move from one city to another. They go from Korea to Buenos Aires to Hyderabad, all over the world, right? And so this develops a global mindset. Minerva has a fantastic technology platform, but I don't think that is the clincher, right? One of the things they do really well is moving around the cities. And one of the students who applied and got accepted to Minerva Project told me that they really tried to find out how resilient they were, how many times they had overcome failure, they had started a project of their own, and that was the criteria by which they picked students, right? So Minerva Project is one. UTEL in Mexico is for adult learners, and they've got this great online program. They have professors on call anytime the student needs support, right? So office hours are anytime the student needs. So that's great for immediate feedback. It's affordable. The programs have content from Google and other employers, so that the students sort of know that I'm learning relevant stuff. Arizona State University is a fantastic university. I'm going to talk about it a bit more later. And I'm sorry, I have Minerva Project twice here. It should just be on the right, not on the left. Singapore Management University, where I used to work, is fantastic because it produces the students with the highest salaries of any Singapore university program, but it doesn't take in fantastic students only. It takes good students and not so good students in terms of academics, but they work the students really hard. There's a reputation for this program being the hardest program, but students go in knowing that at the end of it, they will have become tougher and they'll be in demand by employers, right? So there is a transformation that goes on at the Singapore Management University School of Information Systems. IMD, where I am an executive in residence, is the #1 ranked business school for executive education. I'll talk about that and another Swiss institute later. At the bottom, I'm talking about mindfulness in the sense that Yuval Noah Harari, the author of *Sapiens*, he himself is a Vipassana practitioner and he talks about the benefits of it. There's also mindful communication, like Rosenberg's nonviolent communication or George Kohlreiser 4-sentence rule. I think we are not careful enough about our communication, and paying attention and improving our communication is actually a merit good that is a missed opportunity. I think we really get used to really poor communication because the standards around us are low, and life would be so much better if everybody was trained in school to be a much better communicator. At the bottom, I have the Maharashtra Institute of Technology, which also is called the World Peace University. They have a program where students have to do 3 immersions, one in the local state they're in, one in a state across the country, and one internationally. That's how I met the students when they came to Singapore. They've got a wonderful program. Their mission is to merge science, technology, and spirituality to make students who are positive force in the world. Symbiosis University, also in Pune, has an MBA where Vipassana meditation is part of the program. It's not a secular, it's not a religious type of meditation, it's secular. It's basically mind training to sort of become familiar with how your own mind works, right? And then there's EHL, École Hôtelière de Lausanne. which I will talk about again shortly. Give me a second. My slides seem to be stuck. Okay, so I'm talking about learning agility now. And learning agility is probably the single most important thing, right? It requires timely quality feedback. So if you look at a scale of 1 to 10, just getting a grade at the end of the year, a couple of weeks after you do the exam, is not quality feedback. I know whether I did well or not, but I don't know why, and I don't know what I can do about it. On the scale right at the other end is a coaching conversation where somebody tells me and checks if I understand what the feedback is, and then we create a plan to improve. The instructor tells me what I need to do to get better, and we develop a plan to check whether I'm on track, right? So if you just have quality feedback like a report with some comments which you don't know whether the student understood in the right spirit, I'm not sure where that is, but it's somewhere between 0 and 10. I quote this line from the book Dune, which talks about how the most important thing is to learn how to learn and to have the basic trust that you can learn. How much better if our students in our programs not only passed and graduated with a certificate, but they were more confident about their ability to learn at the end, right? So I think if we're just providing certificates and certifying that people have attained a certain knowledge, that's one thing. We need to do that efficiently, effectively. But I think for society and for loyal and grateful alumni, we sort of have to leave them better than when we found them. And here is some attributes of positive psychology. And you see, love of learning is one of the things that can give you lifetime satisfaction and well-being. So if we can sort of do love of learning, not just effective learning, but stimulate and preserve the love for learning, then I think we do more, right? Now the question is, how do you do that and make money at the same time, right? Now, before that, a slight segue. I have the plight of young or specialized higher education institutions. These are forced ranked by the rankings, and it's a bit unfair. There's this figure in Greek mythology called Procrustes. Procrustes would see any visitor passing through his village and say, "You can stay the night at my house. I have a bed exactly your size." The catch was that if the guy was too tall, he'd chop off his legs. If he was too short, he would stretch him out on a rack to make him fit the bed, right? So by forcing small, young, specialized universities to be ranked together with the big one, it's doing them a injustice. So what should you do if you're a small university, right? So one strategy is to lead in specialized metrics or specialized rankings, and to specialize in being ahead of the metrics and doing things that will in future be part of the rankings, right? So first, Arizona State University, relatively young compared to the other universities, but it has ranked the most innovative university for 6 consecutive years. They have a president, Michael Crow, who is willing to do really controversial stuff. He's been there for a long time. So he's been there long enough to make change. One of his achievements is to get like about 16,000 Starbucks employees have now participated in the Arizona State University online degree program. 3,000 have graduated, 13,000 are still in. But the money that they get, when the student graduates, they get reimbursed by Starbucks. Until then, they have to pay their own way to make sure they're serious. This has done wonders for Starbucks employees across the US, and it's funded Arizona State University to give subsidies to in-state students within Arizona, right? I don't think every president in the US is happy with Michael Crow, but he's making changes. There's a professor called Sriven Naidu who has an evolution, ecology, and social behavior lab that takes the good research that they've done and make sure it's translated into courses. One of the things universities need to do is take their good research and make sure it is taught in an interesting way to students, right? There's Sasha Barab, who's a world-leading expert in game and simulation based learning. And he's created a community learning platform that doesn't put the syllabus first, but puts the problem that the students want to solve first, and they build a learning community around which they share knowledge and expertise and develop content for each other. And there's different kinds of content that they share on this app. some which have academic credit and some which have maybe professional credit, which will help you get employment, and some which are just for fun. Like I heard that there's even um, programs to teach you how to take care of your kid if you have a kid while you're studying, etc. Right? And then there is the University Design Institute, led by Minu Ipe. So Arizona State University is so good that they're teaching other universities how to redesign themselves. I invited Minu to be on this call today. She apologized because she's right now with MasterCard somewhere in Africa working to help 11 African universities digitalize. Now, how many of your flagship universities at home are doing that kind of good work in the world, right? So to me, this is the kind of university we need more of. Number two, Swiss institutions like École Hôtelière de Lausanne and IMD know how to focus on exactly what's important to them. They lead specialized rankings, and EHL is also regarded as having the best graduate placement, which is very important at a time like this when the tourism and hotel industry is badly hit. You want to know that the hotel school you go to is the best at getting you a job. EHL is also leveraging its hotel expertise into luxury brand management, which is a smart thing to do. The third category I'm not talking about is the mission-driven institutions like Maharashtra Institute of Technology, UTEL, and even ASU, which are committed to making sure everybody can get in, almost everybody graduates, and developing many of the mindsets that we need to have beyond their first job, right? Now, here's an important thing that I think should happen, and policymakers and university leaders should listen to this. American universities often ask their graduates, would you do this program all over again? This is the single biggest question that predicts whether they're going to make a donation, and also predicts whether they had a good experience in the university. Right? I think this is a question that every university, every educational program should ask, because actually they can't compare. You can't do two programs and compare. It's not like driving a car, you can't test drive two. When you commit to a program, you commit to finishing it, and it may be the only experience you have. So you want to know whether it was satisfactory. There should be systems for collecting this data on a reliable scale across programs, and for students to know, did my predecessors feel so good about this program that they would do it again? I think that's more important than rankings, right? Also, we could include in those surveys, were you nudged and coached out of your comfort zone? And if you were, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you feel you were pushed to grow and become a more competent, capable, confident person, right? To me, these are the signs of quality higher education. These would be better signals than the rankings or the accreditations that also sort of keep institutions stuck in the past. So I've mentioned about metrics, but there are some things that can't be counted. That's the affiliation, the sort of belonging and the sense of community and the willingness of alumni to help each other out. This is in the end sort of the word of mouth and the off-balance sheet assets that programs will have. I'm going to stop here now and take some questions. Hugo, are we good for time?
We are good for time, and we are good to have you here. So thank you for your time. This was a really good presentation, thought-provoking, and we have many academia people in the room. So I won't be the one asking questions, even though I have many. So over to you guys. Feel free to unmute and ask your question. If we have balance, I can jump with one. You mentioned that every single university, let's say, should ask if the student will buy the training or the educational program again. But the assumption is that they do care, universities, about students. But that isn't the reality, right? Because that is not how they are rewarded somehow.
So, I mean, that's a great question. It could be that in the past they could afford not to care about the students because there was lots of funding for research, and because there were more students than there were educational programs. But today, educational programs are everywhere, and people are even thinking, I don't want to go to university maybe, maybe I can do a micro certification, maybe I can do a Coursera or a MOOC. So if the universities don't wake up to this reality, pretty soon they will rely only on research funding, and research funding isn't always available, right? Governments also have other priorities like healthcare and aging populations, etc. So in Singapore, a couple of years ago, for the first time, the education budget shrank from one year to the next. That's because money had to go to health because of an aging population, right? Before that, every year the education budget was bigger than the previous year. So I think universities need to sort of realize that money may not be as forthcoming as it was in the past, and having happy alumni who will support you either with jobs for your graduates, internships for your graduates, donations when they are successful. I think that's increasingly going to be how education programs are sustainable.
Feel free to drop questions here or to unmute.
Yes, Sriven, it's Arnaud from Paris. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Hi, Arno. How are you?
Fine. I'm alone in a 55,000 square meter university, so I'm happy. Yes, Sriven, I was wondering, listening to you, great talk, by the way.
Thank you.
I was wondering, your point of view isn't it really Anglo-American driven, in the sense that the models of university you're talking about do not exactly fit the continental Europeans. Leave out UK. Okay, UK is different. They're just see what they eat. They are different. Continental Europeans are not that much concerned by money. Okay? I'm not saying we don't need money. We do need money, but I mean that it's less of a concern for universities themselves to reach out to get funding, especially the market aspect towards students is not the fundamental aspect. And so many of your reasoning, I think, probably the focuses would not be the same in continental Europe. I'm not saying nothing's perfect here. That's not the point. It's just that I wonder if your mindset or the framework of your talk is not mostly related to another economical model for universities.
Right. I think you're right, because I guess the way I'm looking at it is more the market model. The first of the three models I shared, right, is the market model where people go to university to find a job, to make as much money as they can, and that's the primary motive. I believe what you're saying is that in Europe, people go to university for self-fulfillment, to develop their minds a little. I'm not saying it's completely the opposite, but you're saying the balance is a bit different. Is that what it is?
Mainly that the concern for the university itself is less to reach out to a market of students, because if you take a country like France, we do not charge tuition fees, right? So the market is not there. It's not reaching out to students. That's my point. And so the mind frame of university governance in countries like France or Spain or Germany, because it's mainly public funding and it's a right to go to university, is a bit different.
Right. So I'm curious. What is it like these days? Are there French students who say, I don't see myself working in France, so I want to get a foreign degree and I can do it online and it's cheap, so I'm not going to attend the local French university? Does that happen?
That's a good question. There's no reason why it shouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, I know the French like France and they might not really want to work anywhere else.
No, wait a minute. Yeah, of course. They're very happy to have their career abroad, and then they come to age and die instantly because we got a good health system. No, aside from that, no, there are many. No, you have to be quite cautious about this. A lot of the young French students want to go abroad and want to leave France, so no, that happens. But do they go for online type of education? I'm not certain. We haven't seen a major shift to that, and it also depends on the sectors. From what I see and from my experience here, technical type of training is doing fine online. The other more classical type of education are just, you can do some blended, but it doesn't work out perfectly 100% online. So I don't see students moving away. What we are seeing and experiencing in France, and this is interesting because it does touch upon some of the things you were saying, is that we're seeing the private sector in education probably taking much more importance than it used to. So that is a signal to universities on how they're doing things, probably.
Yes. So I hear you. I suspect that the market is bifurcating. Just today on Facebook, I saw an ad where you could get a finance degree from Harvard or MIT for 400 Sing dollars a month, over 2 years or something, right? And it's become ridiculous, right? But maybe for a finance degree, it doesn't matter where you're sitting. It's all just numbers and it's technical, right? Whereas if you say I want to work in Asia, then you probably should get to a campus in Asia, mix with the people, etc. So like the two Swiss schools I was talking about, IMD and EHL, they both have a campus in Singapore, right? So so that really you're signaling to your students that you're a global institution. You don't just have one view of the world, right?
But that's probably an effect of the rankings you were talking about, is that it's creating a kind of one-size-fits-all approach to universities.
Yes.
Which is, what do you think about that?
So I mean, in the old days, they would force rank universities who didn't participate. So I remember one time receiving a message that sort of said like, please submit your data, otherwise we will rank you based on the data we can find. And that would be worse for you than if you gave us your data, right? So it sort of held ransom. We're giving away data which possibly then they use to sell consulting advice to other universities. So it's quite an interesting business model. I would like to be in on some of those profits, but recently they have more and more specialized rankings. I think like, right, most innovative university, rankings for hospitality and right, and travel management. So I think while it's better, I think that for me, my main objection is people look at the rankings and they make a broad decision too quickly, right? They really should be asking questions like, let me find an alumni from the program that I'm thinking of and ask them, did they have a good time? Ask them what was good about it, what was surprisingly good about it, and do they think, for example, was there an amazing professor who's such a role model that continues to have an influence on you many years after you graduate, right? Those are the things that the rankings don't show. Right? The rankings sort of take multiple dimensions of quality, collapse it into one number, and there you go. This one number tells you how good you are or not. And if you don't mind, I'll tell you this perverse incentive that the rankings do. So if you're two universities in the same city, you're competing against each other, right? And you have a choice of a great young researcher, very productive, nice to work with, loves teaching, loves to supervise PhD students, and another guy who's old, he's been doing his research for 20 years, isn't really productive anymore, has the same sort of output, but it's from the past, is curmudgeon-y, not nice to work with, doesn't like teaching, doesn't like mentoring anybody, but he belongs to your rival institution. Is your incentive to hire this young guy from outside or to poach the old guy from your rival so that you get a double hit? Your score goes up and your rival score goes down. You see what happens? So if you're a president for 3-5 years, you don't mind taking that short-term advantage. It's somebody else's problem to deal with that difficult colleague much later on, right? And the other thing we have to understand is that universities change takes about 3-5 years at the least, right? You change a degree program, you don't see the graduates and how well they're doing until 3-5 years later. And by which time, if you've made a mistake, you want to make some corrections, it's the next guy's turn, right? So unless we have good leaders in place for 10 years or so, Copenhagen Business School had that at one point. Arizona State University has that at one point. Unless you have this kind of visionary leadership in there for a significant period of time with backing from their governors, universities are hardly going to evolve. What do you think, Arno?
It's a tough question. That some do evolve, but no, I agree. I think that one of the is that the universities that are top ranked today do not have any incentive to really change their models and do things differently. I really see that whatever the general system of higher education that you're within, there's not much innovation. And that's where as you were saying, the online aspect and COVID-19 has actually, of course, pushed that forward. But it's quite difficult to change universities. But then you have governance issues, and they're very different from one country to another. This is where probably private institutions probably have some kind of advantage to an extent. Public institutions, and here I'm from a public institution, the governance is so complex, and it's not agile at all. In today's world, you need some kind of agility to move around. So to that extent, I'm not sure that things will change in a very short period of time, but there are major reasons why things should start to change, obviously. And I think that the COVID is probably going to be the start of a game changer in higher education. Also because governments have to reconsider the way that they were actually investing in the different parts, the social aspects and all that. And a lot of people are saying that in today's world, many of the, at least Western European governments have probably underfunded higher education, okay, because they've been resting on the past success. So I do see a lot of reason why there should be changes coming up, but I haven't seen much in the past few years, at least for the top universities.
Yeah, I mean, if it was easy, it would have changed by now, right? Partly what I hope to do today was just to explain to people why it isn't changing as fast as they might believe is possible, and why really the opportunity is for the private sector to sort of, it's the way I say it to my friend, it's sort of like, do you watch the Romero movies, the zombie movies, where the zombies are walking very slowly and everybody's afraid of them? I don't know why, but these zombies are so slow. It's like EdTech and private equity could dance circles around these universities if they wanted to, right? They just have to figure out how to build community, how to build affiliation, how to build loyalty, and to tap on the alumni the way that universities do. It's not just the fees you collect for the duration of the program. The value is in the longer engagement and the community building. That's where the missing value is, I suspect.
Is there any study or research about what people that are now, I don't know, 17 years old, what they think about universities?
That's a good question. Not that I know of. If anybody tuning in knows, please feel free to chime in. How many people do we have right now?
20 people on board. It will be interesting to understand their perspective, because, or maybe 15-year-old people, not 17, or even younger, because they are digital by default. They get bored very easily. Their attention span is probably less than a minute. There's a professor here in one of the participants that told me a few weeks ago that people don't go to his class anymore in the physical space, and when they are there, there's no attention at all. So I guess these guys are thinking, I want to take something online, I'm going to learn something by myself with a teacher that I want, or educator, or whatever, for free. I'm going to start working and making money, and I'm going to learn something else if I need to. I will consume if I need to consume knowledge. This is probably how they think. Let me give you a stupid example. I've painted my house recently, okay? I went to YouTube to learn how to do it, okay? Years ago, I wanted to learn how to drive a motorcycle. I went to YouTube to learn how to do it. Then I tried. I failed, but I know how to do it. In many complex things throughout my entire professional career, I went to Google. I learned something.
Right.
So this is a game changer. Okay, that can be lifelong learning. We are talking about universities. It's a completely different thing. But is this how young people think nowadays, or is it just like I'm thinking now? I have a young kid. I don't know if I'm going to recommend him to go to university
Right.
because of the opportunity cost. I don't know.
So Bruno, I question what fundamentally as an educator, I question one thing. It's not only about what the student or the young person wants. It's about showing them what they should want, right? And so sometimes it's about having something exciting, meaningful that they just need to have a glimpse of or experience, and then they can be sold. Now, many times people go to university because it's their chance to get away from the home, right, and sort of be free from the parents, maybe find some other adult role models if they're not fortunate to have uncles or things like that, right? So for many people, it's a chance to move out of the home environment and learn to be your own person. But that's also an opportunity to sort of make them into the kinds of adults that society needs in future, right? Whether they are versatile, whether they are climate conscious, whether they are decent people who vote responsibly and don't sort of buy into fake news at election time, etc. So I love Arizona, not just because of McCain's revenge, but also because Arizona State University is a pretty darn good university by any measure.
There's a comment here about recruiters have not abandoned the university school degrees, at least as a yardstick. I agree, even though in technology, it's not a thing anymore. In tech, in specific areas, I'm not talking about research. I'm talking about the job market. They don't care about the degree. It's like, do you know how to code? Do you know how to do this?
Yes. Right.
But a medical doctor or medical science, of course, I wouldn't go to a doctor without a degree. So it depends on what we are talking about.
Yes. Well, so for example, for MBAs, there is one view, and I'm not sure if it's true. There's one view that you are paying for the MBA to signal to your employer, the consulting firm, that A, you are ambitious, B, you're willing to take time off, C, you're willing to work hard, and that if you hire me for 10 years, I'm going to give you my time and my energy. It's a signal of your commitment rather than specifically what you're going to learn during the MBA program, right? So it's more for the signaling effect than for anything you learn. So maybe you pay for the doctor because he's serious about being a doctor, as opposed to some guy who says, hey, I figured out how to cut you open and sew you up again on YouTube.
If I may, a few years back, there was a survey that showed that something like 15–20% of dentists in Italy were not dentists. But that's another thing. No, just coming back to that, and I totally agree with you. It really depends on the sectors. And we were talking about tech and coding, and definitely that's a new world. And here, probably the degrees and for job at least are not the same. But look at it also differently. For example, in France, many people in academia will believe that they have a mission that is beyond just preparing students for jobs. We're also here to prepare, full-grown citizens, critical thinkers as citizens. This idea that we have a general interest mission in terms of transmitting knowledge, and it's not just about the knowledge; it's also about educating citizens as part of a community, and it's not just as giving them the skills for a job. But this is maybe a very European and very French view, but we draw a line between business school, for example, that just focus on the outcomes in the markets, and traditional universities that do not really probably not enough, and that has changed. That's one of the things that has changed probably. But we're less we're less taking into account the needs of the market, because that was not our fundamental mission. It was more like research and creating full-grown citizens in terms of being able to think by themselves and to be critical. And so if you have that approach, then the market aspects are less relevant, and you're going to focus on other aspects of education.
So Arno, what you're mentioning is something in economics. Nothing is purely a private good or a public good, right? Yeah. They have aspects of both. And depending on which view you want to take, you could say the government shouldn't pay for this, people should pay for it because they get a benefit. Or you could say this is good for society, even though they get a benefit, we want more educated people, the government should pay for it. It tends to be where your starting point is. One view of the Singapore approach was, because when we started, we had no natural resources, human beings were the only sort of productive resource. We invested in education, and the government sort of made sure everybody was educated, and that created an upward spiral, because then they are more productive, you earn more money for the country, and then you can reinvest it in education. And so it's always been an upward spiral. The question is, at some point, what do you spend? What kind of education do you spend it on, right? Is it more bankers and doctors and lawyers, or do you sort of need some therapists social activists and whatever else you may have, right? It's difficult to decide among education which education is sort of worth the government paying for.
Humanities. Back to the basics. Humanities, philosophy, and mathematics, and that's it.
So I wonder, I see Marie-Therese, a friend of mine from Vienna University of Economics and Business is on. Marie-Therese, how are you? Maybe she stepped away for a second.
And already unmuted. I was about to say she's trying to find the unmute button, but that's not the case. Sometimes.
That's all right.
Okay, I think we are running out of time. One more question, comment. We have one here, I think, from is it Kevin? I think Kevin. Hypothesis: if we have got to a point where we think universities are about learning skills or getting checkboxes on the CV, then universities are already doomed.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to explain that?
It's better.
Okay. So I can get, there's a million ways I can get skills, right? I can get skills from talking to a person, from going to a physical class, from finding YouTube videos, from reading books, from grabbing textbooks, from finding somebody who's got a university degree and saying, great, what textbooks did you read? Oh, did you video your tutorials? Great, let me see the tutorials, right? I can piggyback on that. I can get checkboxes on my CV by paying people to write my papers for me, right? I can go online and find online marketplaces for people who write my undergraduate coursework for me. So what is the point of any of this? There is no point of any of this, right? Because you can unbundle the getting of skills from the research and from everything else, right? And if all you're looking for is a checkbox, then it's just a system that people will game. It's no longer actually educating people. It's just create a system that you encourage people to game, and that's it. Now, you may not like them cheating, but you might want them to game it in other ways, like paying higher fees or using connections to get positions at universities or whatever. So that one really freaks me out, right? If this is all we're talking about, because I have this vague memory of being at university and learning to think, right? I was on a call this morning, right? I was on a call this morning where we kicked off a project, and the person who had the most useful input, highest value person on that call, was not the person with the PhD in computer science. It was not the person with the vocational degree in graphic design. It was somebody with a degree in philosophy, because his actual critical thinking was phenomenal. It just blew us away. That guy was spectacular. He's got the degree course that when I was an undergraduate was the degree course that guaranteed that you would become unemployed, right? So I'm kind of with Arno and a lot of the stuff that he's been saying with this, that, you know, if all a university is you make a decision to invest for a return on investment, right? A return on investment is a subset of what you want. And what you want is at best a subset of what you need, and actually might be in conflict with what you need. then we're only addressing a tiny subset of the potential benefits of universities. And the way we're addressing it is actually the elements that universities are weakest at anyway, which is skills, right? For a university to pass on skills, they're a more expensive option than many other options. Whereas the other things we might hope that universities do, the teaching people to think, the preparing citizens, as Arno suggested, and so forth, right? That's the stuff that you can't replicate by paying somebody to do your coursework for you or watching YouTube on video, watching a YouTube video, right? So it just seems like if we have these conversations about return on investment and getting skills, or what looks good on your CV, we're narrowing everything down to actually the very elements that universities are least well paid to defend, least well placed to defend. Do you see what I mean? So that was my thought.
Mm-hmm. So that was very well put. Yes, I think Arno just said the same thing. Very well said and put. If I hear you correctly, what you're saying is that the ability to think, the development of thinking skills is the best thing, right? And I was sharing earlier about the app called Ceasefire. There is, if you Google change a view Stephen Fry on YouTube, you'll find a 1-minute video where Stephen Fry talks about the app, and it's basically about crowdsourcing the best ideas to challenge your own opinions, etc. And you could actually, I think, get half of the value of a liberal arts education from that one app, right? So even that aspect of a university could be disrupted by EdTech now, right? So yeah, I think for me, what might be irreplaceable, and maybe some other organizations can do it, but not most EdTechs, is the fact that I'm in a group, we have a challenge that we have to face together. We grow as a team, we grow as individuals, and I make some friends that I can call buddies for life. But I don't need to go to university for that. I could join a sports team. I could volunteer at a local organization and sign up for a big challenge. But I think at university, there's like a couple of hundred of people your age, some who look interesting, some who sound interesting, and you can sort of hang out with different people every week and you discover yourself in that process, right? I think a university happens at that crucial age where it's a turning point. And maybe some people mistakenly attribute their transformation to the university, which would have happened anyway. And so they feel sort of indebted and loyal for the rest of their lives. But I think there's a part of it that is the timing at that stage of transformation in your life and having so many opportunities for different ways to stretch yourself, different people to stretch yourself with. And that can be magic, but it isn't always magic, and it doesn't happen just because you have a university. I think you need good deans, good program managers to sort of consciously create that kind of magic. That's my view.
All right, one more question. I have one question. Everybody talks about disruption. What's your definition of disruption?
Oh, great. I love this question. So, what's his name? There is two versions of this. One is creative destruction and one is disruptive innovation, right? And Clayton Christensen sort of laments that his concept has been mangled to just disruption for disruption's sake. But creative destruction was when one firm displaces another firm because they have a better product, etc. But in the end, society is better because everybody's getting more value for less cost, but maybe one player exits. So one player isn't happy, but everybody else is happier. That's creative destruction. Today, we have disruptive innovation, which sometimes net value is destroyed, but somebody's capturing all the value. I'm not sure if Uber and Grab in the main create more value for people, but certainly some people are capturing a lot more value, right? Where I'm talking about in terms of safety, reliability, etc. It may have gone down, but it certainly is disruptive. The question is, is the total value created more than it was before? And my concern is that we are glorifying disruption without taking account as to whether more value is created. Right? It's cool to just be disruptive. I think when I was a kid, if a teacher called me disruptive, it would be very negative.
You know, everybody
wants to be disruptive. Yeah.
All right, I think we are really running out of time, but there was a lot of interest, so I think we should be happy for that. This video is going to be online at our YouTube channel, so youtube.com/The Innovation Cafe. I'm going to upload the video soon. I think we need a second moment like this, because I think we still have many things to discuss around the future of education. Such a complex topic, but the comments, the participation you've had here, I think it was fantastic. In Sriven, very good. It was another great session at the Innovation Cafe, and thanks to all the participants that are still here after 34, 35 sessions, okay? Have a nice afternoon if that's the case, or a nice evening in your case, Sriven.
Thank you for the opportunity, Hugo. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Cheers.